In an isolated town of the American South, a fanatical religious community lived by the pages of a single scripture they believed to be divine. But the holy book had warped, its letters twisting like flesh and blood. Each time it was read aloud, it brought not salvation but horror. Joints sprouting from the wrong places, skin rotting away, eyes bulging from their sockets. And when the moon shone down on the rotting church, the grotesque truth was revealed. Their God was no deity at all, but an ancient parasite, feeding through every prayer, waiting to claim as its next host anyone foolish enough to draw near. Jonah Lawson drove along the dirt-red road, flanked on both sides by shadowed swamplands where daylight barely slipped through the trees. The silence was so heavy that the faintest sound, the fall of a leaf, the drone of an insect, echoed like a drum inside his chest. He had come here to investigate a rare religious community, whispered about in chilling rumors, an isolated town, bizarre rituals, and strange bodily deformities that plagued its believers. The village emerged like something abandoned by time. Weather-beaten wooden houses leaned under peeling paint, their windows coated with layers of grime. The people watched him pass with hollowed, stone-worn faces, their voices coarse as if scraped down to rock. Jonah felt as though he had crossed into another world, one where ordinary rules no longer applied. At the town's center stood the old church, its structure corroded from within. The wooden doors hung half open, leaking faint light, and the stench of melted wax mixed with something rancid and decaying. Jonah stepped inside, heart pounding. In the gloom, splintered pews lined the floor like broken teeth. The altar was crusted with dust and hardened wax, and yet, lying upon it, rested the community's only surviving Bible. Inside, a cluster of worshippers knelt on the floor, murmuring prayers. Jonah's breath caught when he noticed. Their skin split into jagged cracks, new joints bulging at unnatural angles, some eyes swelling grotesquely from their sockets. Yet, none of them cried out. Their voices droned on, steady, reverent. Each verse echoed through the church like invisible blades, slicing into flesh, and the convulsions of their bodies became part of the chant. Jonah staggered back, horrified. These mutations were not accidents, not illness. They were the direct consequence of the scripture itself. Every word recited was a knife, every prayer an incision. To the townsfolk, it was a miracle of God. But to Jonah, it was something else. A parasitic force, ancient and unholy, twisting bodies through its scripture. His flashlight caught the Bible on the altar. The letters writhed across the page, trembling and curling like veins under the skin, the sheen of dried blood clinging to the ink. A chill surged down his spine. He realized he stood in the heart of a grotesque covenant, an ancient pact festering behind this community's faith. Jonah inhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. But his pulse hammered on, a frantic reminder. He had crossed into the territory of something older than God, where scripture was not salvation but infection. And he knew, one wrong move, one stray syllable uttered aloud, and he too could be claimed as the next vessel, doomed. Jonah pressed himself into a shadowed corner of the church, eyes fixed on the preacher holding the tattered Bible. Its rough, blistered pages glimmered with a sickly red glow from the wax. The preacher's raspy voice rose and fell, merging with the faint groans of the kneeling worshippers, creating a grotesque, almost symphonic chant. A A woman kneeling near the altar suddenly convulsed. The skin on her arm split open, revealing dark, raw flesh beneath. Jonah's heartbeat spiked. Before he could make sense of it, an old man beside him whispered, "Do not fear, it is the blessing of the Lord." But Jonah could not look away. With each verse, joints twisted, ribs stretched in unnatural ways, eyes bulged or swelled grotesquely. Their bodies warped, yet their voices droned on. No screams, no pleas. Sweat and congealed blood mingled with the reek of rot, thickening the air into something suffocating. A moment later, the preacher turned toward Jonah, his eyes glinting with fervor. "You wish to hear as well, don't you? You want to understand the power of God." His tone rasped and cracked, but each word carried a supernatural weight, pulling Jonah in. Jonah trembled, but could not step back. He saw the writing on the page shift, the letters writhed like snakes slithering across the parchment. As the preacher read on, Jonah's body burned. His hands went numb, as though something inside was clawing for release. He stumbled back, but the floorboards quivered, and the congregation crept closer in unison. Their groans merged with the preacher's chant, the rhythm pounding against Jonah's skull. A strange sensation spread through him. His skin prickled, then turned numb. Jonah looked down. His knuckles twitched. His thumbs seemed to swell and split from his hand, as if a new joint were forming. In a heartbeat, he felt something alien threading through his veins. It wasn't pain. It was worse. A vile vitality taking root inside him. In the wavering glow, Jonah saw the others, deformed yet upright, mouths reciting scripture, eyes gleaming with twisted ecstasy. He realized this Bible was no vessel of salvation but a tool, an ancient parasite invading flesh, word by word, prayer by prayer. Sweat and blood dripped from his brow as he steadied himself. He knew one moment of weakness, one slip into the rhythm of those words, and he would no longer be human. In the chorus of groans and the preacher's rasping voice, Jonah understood. If he wished to survive, he would have to trace this rotten scripture back to its root. But here, every step was peril, every breath a potential offering to the ancient power that already ruled the faithful. Shah. Jonah could retreat no further. The stench of rot, dried blood, and burning wax pressed against his lungs, choking him. Each step seemed to sink into the rotting wooden floor, while the groans of the deformed worshippers merged with the scripture, a grotesque chorus not meant for the living. He noticed a small trapdoor beneath the altar. One brick was loose, revealing faint light spilling from below. On its surface, words had been carved, glowing faintly red like clotted blood. Jonah inhaled sharply, his trembling hand pushing the hatch open. A rush of cold air escaped, thick with decay. Yet underneath it, something pulsed with life. Descending, Jonah saw them. Countless half-rotten corpses still moving, their flesh sloughing away in wet strips. Eyes bulged from sockets, joints had sprouted extra hinges, skin peeled in ragged patches. A suffocating dread weighed down on his spirit. This was not illness, not ritual, but the direct handiwork of the ancient parasite. He staggered back, but the figures advanced slowly. Their whispers invaded his head. The scripture wasn't just on paper. It lived across their skin, etched into blood and bone, spreading through every breath. Each word was a root piercing into Jonah's flesh, making his skin sting, his joints ache, his blood clot beneath the surface. Jonah quivered, but forced himself to hide his fear. Observing closely, He realized these abominations retained a twisted consciousness. They murmured verses, howling with a mix of agony and ecstasy, eyes lit with an unnatural black glow. The parasite used the holy text as a tool of hypnosis, turning every believer into a living host, sustaining its existence through generations. Above, he heard the creak of collapsing boards, the preacher and his flock preparing the nightly ritual. Jonah knew this would be greater than anything before, something meant to unleash the parasite across the entire town. He had to escape, but every step risked attack. The corpses seemed to track him, ready to pounce at the slightest movement. He slipped deeper into the cellar and discovered a storeroom filled with old scripture pages. Many were caked with dried slime, their letters writhing faintly as though alive. Jonah flipped one page and felt a stabbing under his skin, as if the words themselves were burrowing into him. The verses crawled, hissing against the paper, and his heart clenched with dread. This parasite controlled everything through the book, through each syllable spoken aloud. Suddenly, a corpse reached out and touched his shoulder. Jonah flinched, blood rushing to his face. In a blink, the creature pulled back, but in his mind echoed a hideous moan, rotting scripture threading itself through his thoughts, verse by verse. He swallowed hard. Unless he destroyed the root of this corrupted Bible, the entire town and himself would be consumed as hosts. He froze in the cellar, eyes fixed on the stairway above. The ritual was about to begin. The faithful still believed this was a miracle. But Jonah knew the truth. The miracle was rotten from the inside out. If he did not act now, the parasite would spread unchecked, reshaping every living body into its brood. Below, the corpses moaned, the scriptures writhed, and Jonah understood. There was only one path left, to face the source of the rotting covenant directly, or die as its next vessel. No. Pull now. Jonah crept up from the cellar, every step echoing inside the decaying church. Above, enormous crimson candles bled their light into the suffocating air. The congregation was gathered, kneeling, their eyes gleaming with grotesque rapture as they muttered scripture under their breath. The preacher stood at the pulpit, his ragged voice booming. "Tonight, the Lord will bless us, through every soul offered." As his words fell, a slick tide of red wax oozed from the altar, curling around the worshippers' feet. Their skin shriveled, their limbs sprouted extra joints, eyes bulged from sockets, yet their mouths kept chanting, their voices unwavering, as though hypnotized. Jonah crouched in the shadows, sweat soaking his brow. He realized the parasite was no longer confined to their flesh. It saturated the entire church, seeping into the very air, lacing itself into every breath, every heartbeat. A chill swept through him as his own skin prickled, muscles tightening painfully. One worshipper staggered toward him, brushing a hand across Jonah's shoulder. Instantly his joints twitched, his skin swelled, nerves flared with agony as though something inside was splitting him apart. The groans of the congregation merged with scripture, pounding against his skull, dragging him to the brink of panic. The preacher sneered, his eyes blazing crimson. "You are the chosen. You shall become the final vessel to complete the covenant." Jonah knew then there was no turning back. They bound him to the altar, where beneath the wood and stone pulsed a massive mass of slime. Covered in weeping eyes and moaning mouths, its body throbbing in rhythm with the recited verses. Each word clung to Jonah's flesh, burrowing into bone, searing his skin, knotting his limbs into grotesque shapes. Blood thickened beneath his skin, bones strained as though sprouting anew. He screamed, Yet consciousness lingered, long enough to understand that the parasite did not want his death. It wanted his body, alive, to be the seed for its spread. In one desperate, lucid moment, Jonah looked upon the deformed husks surrounding him, their chanting rattling in his ears. He made his choice. Straining against the ropes, he toppled a great candle, spilling fire onto the writhing red wax below. Flames roared upward, shrieks of scripture twisting into a chorus of agony as the entire church convulsed. The blaze consumed everything. Smoke choked the air. The warped faithful flailed in torment before collapsing into ash. Jonah crumpled, the stench of burning flesh filling his lungs as the last flame sputtered and darkness swallowed the room. But from within the ashes, a faint whisper lingered. The covenant is not broken. A warning that the parasite had not been destroyed, only silenced. For now. Nay. Ash choked the air, the acrid stench of smoke clawing into Jonah's lungs. He lay face down on the damp earth, sweat mixing with soot, hands trembling. The inferno had gutted most of the church, but the whispers lingered, soft and relentless, threading through his mind. The twisted husks of the faithful had withered in the blaze, yet Jonah knew the parasite was not destroyed. It had seeped into the ashes, into the half-burnt scriptures, waiting for a chance to bloom again. A prickling numbness spread through his body, skin cracking dry, limbs curling tight, heart hammering against his ribs. Every breath was a reminder that his life was being gnawed away from within. Forcing himself upright, Jonah fixed his gaze on the fragments of charred scripture drifting in the pale moonlight. His act had stopped a great ritual, sparing what remained of the town, but the cost was unbearable. Part of him was already infected, his hands roughened, bone pushing unnaturally against skin. He whispered to himself, as long as I breathe, as long as I remain myself, I must keep it from spreading. Yet, even in that rare silence, a long, worming murmur seeped out of the ashes. Rotted verses, writhing, curling into his ears like a hymn of horror. The flames had died, but the parasite endured. In dust, in paper, in every grain of ash. It had not been destroyed, only waiting for another body to claim. Jonah stumbled out of the ruin, his feet sinking into the wet soil, moonlight glinting on drifting motes of ash. The town was silent, as if nothing had happened. Yet he knew the parasite was still watching, still threading through every shadow. He was the only survivor, but also a carrier, marked by the covenant scar. The others were gone. The church lay in smoldering ruin. Jonah stood amidst the wreckage, staring up at the moon, crushed by a loneliness deeper than death. His survival was a hollow victory, haunted by whispers that refused to fade. He closed his eyes as pain lanced through his veins. He had lived, but part of him was forever altered, scarred by the parasite's touch. And in the southern night, the whisper of the rotten scripture lingered, faint, ceaseless, a warning that the covenant had never truly ended. Wah. At the edge of a small Midwestern town, the decaying church of St. Aurelia still loomed over a field of wild grass. They said that more than a century ago, the villagers knelt within its frigid nave and struck a covenant with the devil to escape famine. Each soul offered was sealed inside a candle, and the altar became an orchestra of silent screams. Though the church has long been abandoned, whenever the wind cuts across the plain, a faint yellow light still flickers through the shattered windows. And people believe that if a foolish hand ever dares to spark a flame again, the covenant will rise. And whoever lights, it will never leave hope. Ali, wow. Nathaniel pulled his car to a stop along the muddy road, his eyes fixed on the massive shadow rising from the field of wild grass, St. Aurelia Church. The stonework lay in ruins, its roof collapsed in jagged gaps, yet it still radiated a grim, funereal majesty. He opened the door, and the early autumn wind rushed in, cold and damp, carrying the scent of mildew and rust. Nathaniel was a scholar of folk religion. He had heard dozens of rumors about St. Aurelia, where, long ago, the villagers forged a dark covenant in exchange for survival. Most dismissed the stories as superstition, but he did not. In an old library in Chicago, he had unearthed a tattered manuscript that spoke of the breathing candles of this very church. From that moment, obsession clung to him, driving him here. Stepping through the rotted wooden doors, Nathaniel felt at once that the air had thickened, as if he were stepping into the chest cavity of some colossal beast. Each breath grew heavy, each footstep stretched into echoes that refused to die. He swept his flashlight across the nave. There, on the altar, dust lay thick, except for the faint marks of fingers pressed recently into its surface, withdrawn in haste. A gust of wind tore through the church, the doors groaning. And for an instant, Nathaniel was certain he saw a faint glow at the far end of the nave. He blinked, and darkness returned. His heart pounded. Nathaniel drew out his recorder, his voice whispering into it. St. Aurelia, Day 1. I can feel a presence here, and I believe the candles remain, waiting to be lit. Behind him, the darkness seemed to whisper back, soft and sibilant, in a tongue that did not belong to man. No. Nathaniel moved deeper into the nave, his flashlight sweeping across damp, moss-cloaked walls. The air grew heavier, choked with mildew and the acrid tang of old ash. He stopped at the altar, brushing a hand across the thick blanket of dust, then froze. A rustling noise echoed from the far end of the church. His chest tightened. The beam jerked wildly. A shape darted between the ruined pews. Who's there? Nathaniel's voice cracked, trembling against the silence. The shadow suddenly lunged forward. Nathaniel staggered back, pulse hammering, nearly dropping his light. The beam caught a face, haggard, familiar. Eyes bright, hair unkempt, a camera swinging from his neck. Eli? Nathaniel gasped, scarcely believing. The other man stiffened, then let out a shaky laugh. Nathaniel? Christ, I thought you were something else. The tension eased for a heartbeat, though the dread clung stubbornly around them both. Eli Turner, an old friend, once a fellow traveler on field expeditions, was here, inside the rotting shell of St. Aurelia. What are you doing here? Nathaniel asked, voice low. I could ask you the same. Eli raised his camera and snapped a photo. They say this place is haunted. I figured I'd see if my lens could catch anything strange. Didn't expect to find you chasing whatever dark faith you're still obsessed with. Nathaniel didn't answer. He only gestured at the altar. Do you see it? The wax stains. They've never really gone out. Eli frowned, half skeptical, half uneasy. But before he could reply, a sharp crack rang out, like flame catching a wick. A faint, sickly glow flickered across the altar. A lone candle shivered into flame, though Nathaniel knew he had not touched it. Shadows stretched long and jagged across the ruined walls. Eli lowered his camera, his face gone pale. You see it too?" "Yes," Nathaniel whispered. Wind shrieked through the broken windows, splintering into a chorus of whispers. They swirled around the two men, hundreds of voices rising and falling in a tongue that did not belong to this world. Every syllable scraped at their skin, raising gooseflesh. Eli gripped Nathaniel's shoulder. We should get out, now." But Nathaniel shook his head, his eyes alight with fevered conviction. "No, Eli. This is the proof. The covenant never ended, don't you see? They sealed their souls into these candles." The single flame flared violently, casting light across cracked walls. Within those fissures, Nathaniel thought he saw faces, dozens of them, pressed against the stone, their mouths moving soundlessly. Eli turned away, hands trembling around his camera, no longer daring to press the shutter. Silence thickened. Then came the sound of wax dripping, tick, tick, like blood falling onto the cold stone floor. Eli edged back. "Nathaniel, if you still have any sense left, we should leave before—" His words cut off. The entire nave erupted in light. Dozens of invisible candles roared into flame, their jaundiced glow painting the fractured ceiling. In that glow, shapes coalesced, pale figures lining the central aisle, standing as though in a funeral procession that had never ended. Nathaniel clutched his recorder tight. Eli swallowed hard, eyes wide in horror. Both men knew in that instant they were no longer observers. They had become unwilling guests at a ritual that had never ceased. Now, the jaundiced glow of dozens of candles filled the nave. Their light gave no warmth. Instead, it chilled Nathaniel to the marrow, as though he were standing inside a morgue. Eli gripped his arm tightly, eyes wide, no longer curious but stricken with absolute terror. Along both sides of the aisle, hazy figures began to stir. They had no faces, only man-shaped husks wrapped in wax, chests hollowed inward, arms curled tight like melting effigies. Each movement cracked and splintered like brittle wood. One figure broke away from the front row. The flame on the altar candle bent toward it, as if feeding it with breath. Layer by layer, its skin peeled away, revealing a glistening, pulsing substance beneath. Nathaniel and Eli watched as the thing warped, flesh winding and knotting into the form of a living candle. Its arms stretched into waxen branches split with fissures, and from its mouth spewed molten wax, hissing as it struck the stone floor. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. Eli let out a strangled cry, stumbling back against a splintered pew. His camera slipped from his hands and shattered on the stone, forgotten. The flesh candle flared, a crimson flame erupting from its brow. Its light made the other figures quiver in unison, as though awaiting command. From its warped body came a groan, layered, 100 voices weeping at once from a single throat. "Oh God, oh God," Eli whispered, clutching Nathaniel's shoulder. But Nathaniel could not look away. Terror bound him, yet some dreadful fascination held him still. He listened and realized the groaning carried words. Not random sounds, but names. The names of Saint Aurelia's villagers, one by one, called from the dark. Another candle on the altar flared to life. A second figure stepped free, its skin cracking, wax pouring down its body. The stench of burning flesh rolled through the nave. Eli gagged, pressing his hand to his mouth to keep from vomiting. The whispers swelled, clearer now, their chant unmistakable. More to be lit. New blood for the light. Nathaniel fumbled for his notebook, scrawling frantic notes with a trembling hand. Eli snatched at it, hissing, "You're insane. This isn't something to record, it's something to escape." But before their argument could rise, the two flesh candles lurched forward. Beneath their feet, wax sizzled like acid, eating through the flagstones. A droplet spattered onto a fallen pew. Within seconds, the wood sagged into ash. "Run!" Eli screamed. They bolted down the narrow aisle, the sickly glow dogging their steps. Nathaniel slammed into a crumbling wall, his hand striking a small wooden door. Without a thought, he shoved it open. Both men tumbled inside and wrenched it shut behind them. The small chamber reeked of scorched wax, heavier than the air outside. Their breaths rasped in their throats, seared as though they had swallowed fire. Nathaniel's flashlight swept the room, then froze. Before them lay a circle of candles, dozens of them, encircling a stone altar. But these were no wax tapers. Each was a human finger, bone and flesh fused together, fingertips burning with steady red flame. Eli broke into sobs, voice trembling. "Nathaniel, this isn't a covenant. This is hell." Outside, fists pounded the door. The flesh candles had found them. The flames atop the altar suddenly roared skyward, illuminating ancient sigils carved into the walls, a curse that had never been broken. And in that moment, Nathaniel understood. They had not stumbled upon a relic. They had awakened a covenant that promised no escape. Yee! Footsteps thundered through the darkened church. Nathaniel dragged Eli forward, breath ragged, the stench of burning wax clinging thick in the air. Behind them, the wax figures dragged themselves across the floor, hissing softly like candles cracking as they melted. They burst into the confessional, only to see the walls splitting, wax seeping through like congealed blood. A hand seized Eli's shoulder. Nathaniel swung his flashlight like a club, shattering it, and pulled his friend onward. The nave yawned open before them, and the scene had changed. Every pew was filled with waxen shapes, all heads turned toward the altar. Upon it stood a single colossal candle, burning crimson, its light bleeding across the stone like liquid fire. Before it, a melting priest shape preached, voice booming against the fractured walls. "The covenant has never ended. The flame must be fed with souls." The heat scorched their skin raw. The congregation of candles began to rise, staggering forward, limbs splitting, their bodies dripping foul black resin. Nathaniel clenched the drawings in his hand. The ink had bled scarlet, revealing a sigil of a broken candle beneath the altar. His mind reeled with clarity. The only escape was to shatter the seal. "The crypt beneath the altar!" he shouted, dragging Eli through the swaying throng. The wax creatures grasped at them, shells splitting, oozing a stench of rot and ash. At the altar's base, Nathaniel's palm found a hollowed stone. He pressed hard. The floor trembled, splitting wide to reveal a spiral staircase plunging into the depths. The priest's shape roared. From the great red candle lashed tendrils of molten wax, cracking down like whips, searing the air inches from their heads. Without hesitation, Nathaniel and Eli hurled themselves down the stairwell, heat pursuing like a living tide. Darkness thickened around them until, At the bottom, a monolithic stone door loomed. Carved upon its surface was the image of an inverted burning candle. From its fissures seeped the sound of countless voices, whispering, sobbing, cursing, begging. The door groaned as it began to open. A cold wind surged through, snuffing out the light behind them. Nathaniel felt the pull of inevitability. Beyond this threshold lay the true heart of Saint Aurelia, where the fate of the Covenant, sealed for centuries, would finally be decided. Hi, Silvians. The stone door shuddered open, and darkness surged out like a flood of ice. Nathaniel and Eli stepped inside, their hearts pounding in their chests. Beneath their feet, the floor was split with jagged fissures, from which oozed thick, red wax, like blood boiled into liquid. At the chamber's center rose a colossal candle, vast as an ancient tree. Its flame burned crimson, casting a sickly glow across the cavern. Around its waxen trunk were fused human forms, mouths frozen open, eyes dripping like molten wax, their bodies rigid yet trembling as though still alive. From them came low, overlapping moans, a grotesque chorus of suffering. Eli staggered back, voice trembling. Nathaniel clutched the drawing, the sigil of the broken candle glowing like a wound. He understood. This was the root of the Covenant. The blood candle, devouring the villagers' souls to fuel the sect's unholy power. As long as it burned, the ritual would never end. "We have to extinguish it," Nathaniel whispered, though his breath shook with fear. They stepped forward, but the priest's voice echoed from every wall, thick and dripping like wax. "None shall break the covenant. This flame is your blood." The monstrous candle flared, tendrils of red wax uncoiling and lashing down. They wrapped around Eli's legs, dragging him toward the trunk. He screamed, thrashing, but the wax was as unyielding as iron chains. Nathaniel lunged, pulling desperately, but the candle clutched tighter, hungrier. "Go!" Eli shouted, eyes wild with both terror and resolve. "You have to destroy it, even if I don't make it." Nathaniel shook his head, tears brimming, but Eli shoved him hard toward the flame. In that instant, Nathaniel understood. Only a final sacrifice could end it. Eli lifted his face, his eyes gleaming in the hellish red light. "End it." And then he let go, surrendering himself to the candle. His body was swallowed whole, the flame surging higher with a shriek that rattled the earth. The chamber convulsed. Nathaniel seized the moment. He tore the last relic from his pack, a flask of sacred oil scavenged from the archives, and hurled it into the heart of the fire. A deafening roar split the air. The blood candle screamed, fissures ripping through its body as imprisoned souls burst free, wailing in a torrent of cold wind. The light collapsed into itself, plunging the cavern into utter blackness. When Nathaniel awoke, he lay among the rubble, outside Saint Aurelia. The night sky loomed above, moonless, silent. No Eli, no moans, only the crushing stillness of a grave. He staggered to his feet, his hands caked in hardened wax, a mark that would never fade. The crypt, the candle, all gone, along with Eli. But deep within the silence, he caught the faintest whisper riding the wind. "The covenant is not finished." Nathaniel shivered. Somewhere, in the shadows of Appalachia, the blood flame still waited, for another sacrifice to awaken it once more. Pixie. In Port St. Lucie, Florida, there stands a tree the locals call the Devil's Tree. In the 1970s, a cold-blooded killer hung his victims from its twisted branches. Though he died in prison, people believe his spirit and the restless souls of those he murdered remain bound to its roots. At night, the rotted ropes still sway in the wind, creaking with a sound like ragged breath, the last gasps of the hanged. Those who dare to draw near rarely leave whole. Whoa! Florida, though. The summer air was heavy, thick with the swamp's breath, damp earth, rotting leaves, and the faint sting of stagnant water. An old pickup truck rattled to a stop on a dirt road, its headlights slicing the darkness before dying into silence. 4 young travelers climbed out, standing before the wall of forest that marked the edge of Port St. Lucie's wilderness. Ryan was the first to step down, eyes burning with excitement. He had read an old newspaper article about the Devil's Tree, a cursed oak where unspeakable murders had once taken place. For him, this wasn't a warning. It was the perfect urban legend challenge. Lena, his girlfriend, was less enthusiastic. Arms crossed, she stared at the dense tree line with suspicion. "This is insane," she muttered under her breath, though she followed anyway. She wasn't superstitious, not really, but the thought of standing where real people had died twisted her stomach into knots. Chris, tall and broad-shouldered, carried his ever-present video camera. He grinned as he filmed the group, already imagining how the footage would play out. "Found footage gold," he joked, panning across Lena and Maya. But Maya didn't smile. Quiet, withdrawn, she had felt uneasy the moment they pulled off the road. The heaviness in her chest grew stronger with every step. The 4 trekked deeper along the dirt path. The chorus of insects grew sparse, replaced by an unnatural silence. Nearly an hour passed before they stumbled into a small clearing, and there it was. The Devil's Tree. It towered above them, a grotesque sentinel of wood and shadow. Its bark was gnarled and cracked, the limbs bent at odd angles like broken arms. Hollow knots stared back like twisted faces. From the largest branch hung a single rope, frayed and rotting, swaying gently in the warm breeze. The creak it made was sharp, dry, like a strained breath caught in a dying throat. Maya shivered, convinced that unseen eyes were watching from the darkness. Chris raised his camera, tilting slowly upward to capture the full scale of the tree. "Perfect," he whispered. Ryan stepped closer, pressing his palm to the rough bark. Despite the heat around him, the wood was unnaturally cold. For an instant, he swore he felt a faint, steady pulse beneath his hand, like a heartbeat buried in the trunk. He yanked his hand back, masking his unease with a grin. "Here," he said firmly. "We camp here, right under the Devil's Tree." Lena stared once more at the dangling rope, unease clawing at her. But when Ryan struck a match to start a fire and Chris circled eagerly with his camera, she reluctantly joined in. Maya remained seated on the ground, her gaze fixed on the swaying rope, as though she expected something heavy to drop from it at any moment. The night crept in, shadows stretching long and endless. And as darkness swallowed the clearing, the Devil's Tree cast its shadow over them all. "Now then." The fire crackled and spat, casting trembling light across the clearing. The 4 sat in a rough circle, beer cans in hand, doing their best to laugh, to pretend at ease. But the massive trunk loomed above, its shadow stretching long and heavy, swallowing the fire's glow as if it wanted to smother the night itself. Chris rarely lowered his camera. He moved slowly, capturing every detail. The frayed rope swaying in the breeze, the warped knots in the bark that resembled twisted faces, the firelight flickering against the tree like shadows writhing across its skin. He smiled, satisfied. This was the perfect set for a horror film. Ryan, with the eager tone of a storyteller, recounted what he had read. How a serial killer once bound his victims, tortured them, then hung their bodies from the very branch above them. The man had died in prison, but visitors swore they'd heard the rasp of tightening rope, seen the silhouette of bodies dangling in the dark. His voice dropped lower, savoring the tension. But as he finished, the forest wind rose suddenly, scattering embers through the air. Lena shivered, her gaze fixed on the rope as it swayed harder. "That's enough, Ryan," she snapped quietly, though gooseflesh prickled her arms. Maya hadn't looked away once. Her voice was barely more than a breath. Is there someone hanging there?" All eyes turned upward. Nothing. Just the rope, twisting idly. Chris chuckled, but when he glanced at the viewfinder, his grin faltered. On the tiny screen, a faint silhouette dangled from the branch, its shape swaying in rhythm with the rope. He blinked, tilted the camera again, and it was gone. He said nothing. The night thickened. Around them, the forest was unnervingly still. No crickets, no frogs, only the sigh of wind sliding through the branches. The air grew dense, each breath sticking in their throats. Near midnight, Maya bolted upright, pale and trembling. She stammered that she'd heard whispering right against her ear while her eyes were closed. It said my name," she whispered. Ryan brushed it off, insisting it was her imagination. But then, a sharp crack at the base of the tree. All four heard it, clear, distinct, like a rope tightening. Chris swung the camera around, its small light piercing the dark. The rope was swaying violently now, emitting a dry, grating screech, as if some unseen weight was dragging it taut. The fire roared suddenly, then sputtered to embers, leaving only a faint, unsteady glow. The shadow of the tree lengthened, stretching over the camp like a predator's hand. Lena clutched Ryan's arm, whispering that they needed to leave. But the path they had taken was gone, swallowed into an endless wall of black. A chill swept through the clearing, though the air was perfectly still. The rope jerked wildly, then stopped all at once, hanging slack, as if something had just dropped from it. Maya burst into sobs. Chris filmed frantically, but through his lens, he saw only twisted branches, curling and stretching like skeletal arms, waiting to receive them. Ryan forced himself to stand, voice trembling. "It's fine," he said, though his bravado had cracked. He lifted his flashlight and trained it on the rope. Empty. Nothing there. And yet, they all knew. They were no longer alone beneath the devil's tree. Norton, shy. The night pressed in heavy and absolute, the fire reduced to dying embers, the only real light, the trembling beam of Ryan's flashlight. The four of them huddled close, breaths short and ragged, as though the darkness would swallow them whole if they strayed apart. Chris held his camera tight, eyes glued to the screen. To the naked eye, the rope was empty. But through the lens, something else appeared. A pale, blurred figure hanging limp, head slumped to the side, hair shrouding its face. He shuddered but couldn't look away. When he panned to another branch, another body swung there. Then another. and another. 2, 3, 4, until the clearing seemed choked with swaying spectral shapes. His throat was dry as he whispered, trembling, "Guys, look at this!" Ryan snatched the camera, pressing his face close to the viewfinder. The excitement drained from him, replaced by a stark pallor. It's just a glitch," he insisted. But when he lifted his flashlight and swept the beam across the tree, Lena screamed. For an instant, they all saw it. No camera tricks, no shadows. A body dangled from the branch before them, swaying in the breeze. The skin was ashen, the head hung low, the weight shifting with each creak of the rope. And then, as if dispersed by the air itself, it vanished, leaving the rope to swing hollow once more. Silence. Only Maya's choked sobs broke it. Ryan tried to steady his voice, though it trembled. Hallucinations were just stressed. But even as he spoke, a sharp crack split the stillness, like a branch snapping under a heavy load. Lena spun around and froze. Just a few steps behind her, another hanged figure. Its eyes were open, rolled white, fixed directly on her. Her scream tore through the clearing as she yanked Ryan to the ground. The fire spat and flared, shadows whipping wildly. Chris swung the camera in every direction, capturing what none of them could deny now. Dozens of figures suspended above, crowding the branches. Some only faint outlines, others so vivid he could see the deep purple bruises wrapped around their necks. Maya clutched her ears, shrieking, "They're whispering! They're calling me! They want me to follow!" Lena sized her shoulders, fighting to hold her back, but Maya writhed, as though invisible hands were dragging her toward the trunk. Ryan raised his light, shouting into the void, "We're not afraid. We only came to see." But his voice was drowned in the sudden chorus of sound, the simultaneous screech of ropes straining, taut and merciless. Above, the phantom bodies swayed together in rhythm, a silent choir twisting in a wind that wasn't there. A pale glow shimmered faintly, as though the clearing itself had become a macabre stage. Chris let the camera drop, clutching his head, mumbling, "They're not going away. They're here. They want us to take their place." The fire died with a hiss, plunging everything into suffocating black. Only Ryan's flashlight flickered, its beam jittering across fractured glimpses of horror. And in that trembling glow, all three saw the same vision. Themselves, each one of them, hanging from the branches. Bloated faces, bulging eyes, rope-burned necks. The flashlight clattered to the ground, rolling, casting fractured light up the trunk of the devil's tree. Maya went still, her eyes emptied, her lips moved with a voice that wasn't hers. "You cannot leave. The tree has chosen." No one had time to react. A sudden gust of icy air swept the clearing, and the rope groaned loud and sharp, ready, waiting for a neck to claim. "Nyobima." The wind howled through the clearing like a chorus of the damned. Shadows danced wildly across the devil's tree, broken fragments of light from Ryan's fallen flashlight stuttering across the dirt and flaring briefly against the swaying figures above. Maya stood rigid, eyes rolled white, lips moving ceaselessly. "It's calling me, telling me to climb higher. It says I'll be free." Her voice was no longer her own. It was layered, distorted, as though countless other voices were speaking through her, groaning from deep within the earth. Lena clutched her tightly, sobbing. Don't listen. Maya. It's not real. It's not. But Maya's body was cold and stiff, as lifeless as a corpse on its feet. Ryan lunged forward, grabbing Maya's arm to pull her away from the trunk. The moment he touched her, a crushing force clamped onto his hand. Agony seared down to his bones. He tore himself free with a scream, collapsing, his palm seared red with rope-like burns, as though the bark itself had branded him. "The tree," Chris stammered, his camera trembling in his grip. "It's alive. It wants blood. It won't let us leave." He swung the lens upward and saw that the hanging shapes were no longer spectral illusions. They moved, their heads tilted in unison, gazes falling on the living below. White, lidless eyes gaped wide, mouths hung open. And for a heartbeat, Chris swore he heard it, the collective crack of necks snapping, echoing through the clearing. Then it struck. From above, a rope uncoiled, slithering down with the speed of a striking snake. In an instant, the noose cinched tight around Maya's throat and yanked her skyward. Her scream split the night. She kicked and clawed, her legs thrashing as the rope bit deeper, skin darkening to a brutal violet. Lena and Ryan seized her legs, dragging downward with all their strength, but the invisible force from the tree pulled harder, inexorable. Inch by inch, Maya rose into the air. "Cut it! Cut the rope!" Ryan roared. Chris fumbled in his pack, yanked out a small knife, and slashed at the noose. Sparks flew as the blade bounced off. The rope wasn't fiber at all, but something impossibly hard, like frozen steel. Chris staggered back, hands trembling. Maya shrieked, then fell silent. Her body twitched violently before sagging, limp. Her eyes bulged, her chest heaving ragged gasps that faltered and broke. The only sound was the dry rasp of the rope grinding against bark. "No!" Lena screamed, clawing at the tree itself, her fingers splitting, blood streaking the bark. But the branches writhed like grotesque limbs, curling out and striking her down into the dirt. Ryan's voice cracked into madness. He threw his arms wide, shouting at the looming trunk. "What do you want? Take me instead. Let her go." And the forest answered. A laughter erupted, harsh, guttural, spilling from every direction at once. It was everywhere, echoing in the trees, grinding through the soil, shaking in their bones. The hanged shadows thrashed wildly, swaying like a grotesque choir applauding his desperate plea. Chris filmed, his voice breaking into a whisper. "It never lets go. Anyone who comes here belongs to it." Maya dangled high above, her neck grotesquely twisted, and then, slowly, her lifeless eyes rolled forward, bleaching to a blank, vacant stare. The same hollow gaze as the others. Another body had joined the Devil's Tree's eternal chorus of the damned. Penny, meow. Maya dangled in the air, her body limp, her face bruised and purple, her eyes hollowed into something that no longer belonged to the living. Lena screamed her name again and again, but her cries were swallowed by the skeletal trees, fading into nothingness. Ryan yanked Lena to her feet, the burn marks of the rope still glowing red across his palm. His voice cracked, raw with desperation. "We have to leave, now, before it takes us too." Chris clutched the camera tight, trembling. "You don't get it. There is no way out. It won't let us go." As if to confirm his words, The forest shifted before their eyes. The path they had taken to enter this place was gone, swallowed whole. In its place loomed walls of trees, their twisted branches knitting together like blackened fingers to bar their escape. Every direction they turned, the beam of the flashlight cut only into suffocating dark heavy with swaying silhouettes, bodies swinging just beyond reach. Lena's teeth chattered. It's like we're trapped inside it. Ryan's grip tightened around the knife, his eyes feral. Then we kill it. We cut the damn tree down. He lunged at the gnarled trunk, hacking again and again. Each strike rang out not like wood, but like shrieks, agonized, piercing, human. Thick sap bled from the wounds, dark and syrupy, reeking of iron and rot. The stench gagged Lena. She doubled over, retching. Chris instinctively raised the camera. Through the lens, Ryan's form blurred, his face flickering into that of a hanging corpse, eyes bulging, mouth gaping in eternal scream. "Ryan, stop!" Chris cried out. "It's turning you into one of them." The knife slipped from Ryan's grip. He staggered back, clawing at his throat. Rope marks carved deep across his neck, tightening as if dragged by an invisible noose. His breath hitched, a wet rattle. He reached toward Lena with trembling fingers. "Run, Lena, run." She seized his hand, sobbing, trying to wrench him free from the tree's hold. But in a heartbeat, the darkness surged, devouring him whole. When the flashlight swung back, Ryan was gone. Only a rope dangled gently from a branch, swaying in silence. Lena collapsed, choking on grief. Chris hauled her up, his own voice shredded. "We have to keep moving. We have to try." They stumbled blindly through the shifting woods, but the deeper they ran, the more the forest filled with them. Bodies, hanging from every branch, dozens, hundreds. Vacant eyes followed their steps, mouths slack in silent mockery. Among the faces, Lena saw Maya, Ryan, and countless others she didn't know, victims of generations past, bound eternally to the tree's curse. Their family had grown. The flashlight sputtered, its glow dimming, battery drained to the final breath. Chris whispered to the dark, as if confessing to himself. "As long as the camera records, someone will know. Someone has to know." But Lena already understood. No one would believe. No one would ever find them. The wind rose in a hollow roar, twisting into laughter, into a dirge. Overhead, the moon vanished behind the branches, smothered. The forest drowned in black. The tree had chosen. Arnon